Welcome to Breaking Barriers with R&D, your direct line to Randy Dowdy and David Hula, here to help fellow farmers unlock the potential in their fields. Are you looking to implement best practices that maximize ROI? You've come to the right place. Real value, real yield, real ROI. Breaking Barriers with R&D starts now. Breaking Barriers is brought to you by Pioneer. When you compare Pioneer brand Vorseed Enlist corn to the competitor, Vorseed Enlist dominates in delivering yield. Your best year starts with Pioneer. And by Durastack Trait Technology, the latest innovation from Syngenta. Available for the 2027 season, Durastack technology features 3 powerful modes of action to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outmatch corn rootworms every move. And by Calmer Cornheads, home of the world's only all-weather stock roll. Learn more at calmercornheads.com.
Well, welcome to another episode of Breaking Barriers with R&D. I'm the D part or the Dowdy part. I don't know which one. I get so confused, Dowdy. But man, it's a pleasure to have you on this podcast again, just to see what's going on with you. And I'm going to apologize for the noise. Today, Dowdy, we were supposed to get some rain, and I had all these plans because they said we were going to get up to a half inch, 3/4 of an inch of rain. And just like most weathermen, they were wrong. We got 0 rain, and we're doing our corn hybrid plot today. So, moving, see things going around. That's why. Because
David, that's where you made your first mistake. How long you been married?
well, it'll be 39 years this November.
You need to start listening to a female meteorologist, because remember, women are never wrong.
They're never wrong.
So you need a female meteorologist. If nothing else, there'll be a good excuse as to why it changed, right? So
that's funny. Well, we got, Dowdy, here we're still in hurricane season, and we have what they call a nor'easter coming up on the coast. And I'm still trying to figure out why they're calling it a nor'easter, because usually that's an event we get in the wintertime. But this weekend, we can see some rain and some winds, 30 to 50 miles an hour. Depends on how close you are to the coast. So that's exciting. So we might, but just to give the folks in the audience, after I finish this corn hybrid trial, we got about 200 acres left to go. Virginia's having a good crop. It's not going to be, it might be Virginia's best crop. And, we have a guest, Tim Woodward, on. We'll hear him talk today, and maybe he give us some of his thoughts about the crop. But it's going to be one of the best Virginia crops. It's not going to be our best crop, but it's either going to be number 2 or 3. So, man, good Lord, kind of surprised with some of the yields that we've captured just because of the weather we had. But when you look at the weather on the last part of the season, we were cool. We were much cooler than normal. And that kind of surprised us. And that gave us some heavier corn, Dowdy. So it kind of, that's like putting a little icing on the top.
There you go. Well, I can read between the lines. That probably means you probably got a good NCGA number. Already setting the stage for how it happened. One thing I've been able to do over the years is pattern David. And when he starts giving explanations of how things went better than he thought, oh boy, here we go. So I won't ask any numbers, David, but my money's still on you.
Well, there's no new record by any means, but so there's always room for somebody to beat us, and I'm everybody's cheerleader because I like to see them do better. That way, I can learn something from them. But we did get some good corn, so I'll leave it there. We got to let NCGA announce all that sometime.
Well, I know you and Barley kind of go back and forth at each other. You get to keep the bragging rights?
We picked some corn at home, and 2 hybrids, and they both, one was a new Pioneer hybrid 14364, and the other one was Pioneer 13777. And Harley beat me by 2 bushels there.
Well, we know the king ain't gonna go down very easy. That's for sure. So I'm in Georgia. Today I've got Easton this week, and everybody's picking peanuts and defoliating cotton, and finally got rain down here. They needed it to dig peanuts bad. They were pulling off. They needed a bunch of them were turning loose in the holes, and they were afraid if it got a rain, they would start sprouting before they could get them dug. So a lot of people were out there in some very hard ground conditions trying to dig peanuts, and that's a nightmare. But we've got some rain. Now they're scrambling to get, before the seed starts to sprout, they're scrambling to get them on top of the ground. So a lot of peanut harvest going on. Prices are terrible. A lot of people didn't have contracts. They're putting them in the loan for $3.55. That math does not work. It don't matter if you make 3-ton peanuts. That math just does not work for the risk that you take, for sure. So hopefully there's something coming with trade deals or something that's going to get us where we need to be, but we still need to control prices on the input side. A lot of these companies are, there's no competition, David, and competition is a win for a farmer. But I don't feel like there's any competition on the equipment and the supply side anymore. These companies have been allowed to get bigger and bigger and bigger and monopolized, and that's problematic. I was having a conversation with a farmer this morning, and he's about to go on 60 Minutes from what I understand, and just talk about just these things. I mean, it's bad, David. As you well know, the farmer right now, it's as bleak as the people's got the 1,000-yard stare. A lot of people's not going to survive what's going on with the prices. You can't yield your way with the prices and the input costs the way they are into profit margin to where there's a positive in front of that final number. So it's not good, as you well know, but that's kind of what's going on in Georgia. We finally got a half-inch of rain this week in Michigan. Bean harvest is well on its way. Corn's still going to be a while. A lot of it still needs this heat. It was 36 this morning up there. I think it's supposed to be 32 in the morning. So it may smoke a cigar from that standpoint, because of if it gets a frost on it or a freeze, it's going to hurt things for sure. But it's been in the 80s. I was there this past week, low in the 60s and high in the mid 80s. So still collecting some last minute heat units, but it's been awful dry, David. And there's a pile of folks that needed rain. So the heat was a double-edged sword. They needed the heat, but didn't have a lot of moisture to help move the crop along. So that's kind of what's going on in my neck of the woods. And deer hunt. We hunting, David. We killing big bucks. If you're a whitetail enthusiast, go to Next Level Whitetails. Follow us on Facebook. We got a lot of big whitetails up there. It's been a new venture for me the last 5 years, and man, we're having a blast. No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. Well, you know my feeling on the whitetail hunt. They cost me enough money. Now, you got that half-inch of rain, but I was looking at the Weather Channel the other day, and there was a lot of wind stuff in that. I trust.
Yeah, the wind wasn't that bad for me. I'm kind of central, a little above central Michigan, I guess north-south, and I did hear there's quite a bit more wind and or rain in southern Michigan. Jake Jodes and them probably was in the heart of it. There was quite a bit of that, basically from Muskegon south. I'm about an hour and 10 minutes north of Muskegon. But yes, you're right. There was some weather events that happened further south than me.
Now, in reference to your peanut guys, I'm doing my part. This time of year, we eat plenty of peanut butter and jelly. So,
there you go.
Because Miss Sandy cooks supper. Miss Sandy cooks supper, but she don't pack me a lunch, and I'm too far from Chick-fil-A. So, got to do some peanut butter and jelly. But,
so you after 39 years, you think you'd have Miss Sandy trained to bring you a hot meal out there after 39 years, David?
there's not enough training. So
we need to get them signed up. Like I asked them, those Amish that was doing that work for me, I asked them before if they had an obedience training school, because their wives are so, on top of things. They have meals and they're hands on and they're working with their husbands and all these things. And I wondered if they had some kind of obedience training school we could send people to from time to time. That's a joke, so nobody don't get offended.
there ain't none of that going on. She cooked some mean pork chops last night, so I'm appreciative of all that. But so Dowdy, it's my good pleasure to have Tim Woodward on from Virginia Seeds, and he's part of Total Acre. And one of the things that this time of year, and you and I were talking about, hey, what could we be talking about now? And the country, most of the country's been dry, got a little bit of rain. They've been warmer, and some of the things that we have known just from where you and I live, the benefits to cover crops. And I know Tim does a lot with cover crops, not only selling through their seed business, but he also does a lot of trials and understanding what the values they have. So I think both of us felt like Tim would be a great addition to the podcast today.
Hi, I'm Marion Calmer, farmer and inventor of the Calmer BT Chopper Stalk Roll. For over 20 years, farmers have been using the Calmer BT Chopper Stalk Roll to cut corn stalks into confetti-like pieces for accelerated decomposition. Call us at 309-629-9000 or visit us online at calmercornheads.com.
Farmers, let's talk Pioneer brand 4-seed Enlist corn.
Yes, Coach!
Wow, love the energy. Okay, it clobbers corn rootworms and weeds for higher yields.
Yes, Coach!
And 4-seed Enlist delivers next-generation corn rootworm protection.
Yes, Coach!
Plus powerful exclusive genetics and flexibility to manage tough weeds.
Yes, Coach!
Now get out there and
grow!
I guess being a Pioneer agronomist is like being a coach.
Start your best year yet at pioneer.com/rootworm.
With corn rootworm costing farmers up to $1 billion a year, you need the right strategy. Introducing Durastack trait technology, featuring 3 powerful modes of action to strike corn rootworm at full force. Outsmart, outmaneuver, and outmatch their every move with the industry's first triple BT protein stack built for corn rootworm control. Take back your yield potential. Make your move at Durastack.com. Available for the 2027 season.
Get the latest markets, weather, and rural news whenever it works for you. Farm Journal TV is on Roku, Fire TV, and mobile. Try it for free for 14 days and take ag with you everywhere.
Without further ado, Tim, let's get him join us and let's find out what's going on. Tim, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
It's going, man. We all trying to survive. Where do you find yourself today?
I'm in the office today, the place I do not want to be in right now. I'd rather be out in the field. We got a little bit of rain last night, just enough to make you mad, not enough to really do anything. So,
you in Virginia?
Yeah, we're in Orange County, which is just north of Charlottesville, a little bit northwest of Richmond, and southwest of the nation's capital, DC.
I got you. Well, you've been a part of Total Acre for what, 2 years now, maybe 3?
Yeah, about 2 years.
About 2 years. And I remember one of the first meetings that you came to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you came up to Rob Gary's in Delaware, and you kind of sitting in the back left of the room, and you were there with 2 or 3 of you guys, and you started asking questions, and I knew pretty quick that I wasn't dealing with the typical farmer that normally asks questions. The farmers that were with you were asking a different level of type question, and you were asking questions, and that's always good to help keep iron sharpens iron, right? So it's always good to have smart people out there that's in the field and trying things that we can learn from too. So we appreciate you being a part of today's show. David and I were discussing, some of the things that farmers should be considering. And as David mentioned, it's been hot. A lot of beans have matured and come off the fields. There's still some warmth. Now there's some moisture. You know, I know a harvest is going on, but people should be really focusing on not just trying to get this crop out of the field, but thinking about fall tillage, thinking about chasing that combine out of the field just as fast as they can, getting some tillage and field work done, managing residue, but also considering cover crops. Give us a little bit of experience, what you guys are planning and what you've had success with. Because I remember you talking about doing a lot of different work behind various cover crops. And I'm sure part of it is just NRCS related, you know, equip type payments or whatever, but also just the sheer fact of the biological performance where cover crops are planted versus where they're not. So give us your spiel. Tell us what you're thinking.
Started looking at cover crops many years ago, probably 13 years ago at this point, and as an agronomist prior to starting the seed company, I was a consulting independent agronomist and applied the law of the minimum in everything I did, and realized really quickly that the number one limiting factor in our yields was water. We're in an area that's predominantly dry land, and so we don't have the opportunity to irrigate. So started looking at cover crops as a mechanism to improve soil moisture and transpiration rates in the crop itself. Took input from NRCS and a lot of people on the national platform of what a cover crop should be. So a lot of diversity in the mixes and high biomass, and it really just kind of didn't work for us. One of the things that we kept in the front of our mind is good corn agronomy, good bean agronomy. So with corn, evenness of emergence is critical. And we were just taking nosedives with the evenness of emergence. And but we did really quickly understand that there was something there, that the moisture holding was better, nutrient availability was better. It did solve some issues, but it presented its own challenges. So we just got to work and started developing and tinkering with a cover crop system where we kind of get our cake and eat it too. Worked really closely with somebody that lives really close to David, that David knows well, Paul Davis. He turned me on to vetch and some ways to manage it. And so what we've had a lot of success with in corn is using a combination of some type of cereal like oats or rye or triticale in combination with vetch and various types of clovers. The trick to it, though, is coming in early prior to jointing of that cereal and killing out the grass component. So going in with clethodim to take out the grass component to allow the hairy vetch to grow off. That's been a system that is probably the number one most profitable thing we've done on the sister operation to the seed company, but any operations that I've worked with. We're seeing on average about a 19 to 20 bushel yield advantage everywhere. We're getting about 230 pounds of nitrogen on average from that crop. I pulled some numbers, 54 pounds of phosphate and about 219 pounds of potassium. So those are things that are actually coming out of our NPK budget by introducing this into our overall system. So we're green planting into the vetch. There's some other management steps that we do, but our aim is to consistency of emergence and to extract the maximum value from the cover crop as we possibly can. So
now I'm gonna ask some dumb questions along the way, Tim, because you're triggering thought along the way. So some of them will be short answers, but I'm gonna have multiple just based off of what I've just heard. Now, Tim, you put the cereal in there, oats, wheat, rye, triticale, whatever. Is that more to hold the world together, to help shade out maybe some weeds, etc., just to have another species there? What's the logic behind the small grain if you're going to kill it?
Well, it does all those things, but the number one thing that it does is provide a little bit of a thermal barrier to these sensitive vetches. So we're selecting varieties of hairy vetches or Balanza clovers that if out there on their own, have the potential of freezing out. So by having that rye plant there or that oat plant there, it's providing just a little bit of barrier to wind chill. And what that means in the following spring is that it grows off more quickly. Because that's one thing that we don't do is we don't sacrifice good corn agronomy. So there's a concept out there that you have to delay your corn planting until the cover crop starts to bloom or gets to a certain biomass amount. I don't do that. We're going to plant corn when the conditions are right to plant corn. So our soil temperature's there, soil moisture's there, and we got GDUs in the forecast. So we're selecting varieties to get us the value by the time we need to plant corn.
Now, how many pounds of acre of these small grains, this grass crop are you planting?
It's a little bit dynamic based on the time of year that we're planting, how late into the fall we're getting, but typically it's about 40 pounds of rye, or about 30, 32 pounds of oats. It's not a full bushel rate most times of the cereal. And we get pretty aggressive on the hairy vetch. It'll be 15 to 20 pounds of hairy vetch. And then the Balanza clover, we introduced that into the mixture mostly because it likes wet feet. So any ground that may drown out the vetch, that type of clover thrives. And we want a nice even nitrogen credit across that field. So that's why we introduced that type of clover.
And when you you say you do it just before jointing, obviously that depends on planting date, the weather, etc. Just using the tape measure, how big is that grass when you go in and you destroy it?
On average, like you said, it depends on how early in the fall they planted it. But on average, it's just past the height of your boot. The big thing by trying to kill it prior to jointing is that crown at the soil surface after jointing becomes really tough and lignified. It doesn't break down quickly. And that was what was causing our lack of planter performance and inconsistency of seed depth. If you can imagine your gauge wheel going across a soil surface and hitting one of those crowns, riding up just a quarter inch or half inch, and that's your seed depth, just wavy across the whole field. So by taking out that small grain prior to that point, we have more consistent seed depth along the way.
Are you doing 12, 16 ounces of clethodim? Is it controlling it pretty well, or are you having to go out there with higher rates? I know before joining it's easier to kill, or just before it starts to head, it's easier to kill. Some people swear up and down it's easier to kill once it heads, but now you got a lot of biomass to have to deal with. When you go out there just before that boot top high grass, how hard is it to kill, and what are you spraying?
It's been fairly easy to kill. We're running an 8-ounce rate of clethodim. It's just at a 2-pound product type rate.
Okay.
So it's been pretty easy to kill. What's interesting, we do things in that pass to start setting up for that next crop. So we don't want to miss an opportunity to build for the following crop. So we'll do 20 pounds of nitrogen at that pass. That really has greatly improved the nitrogen fixation of the biomass of the vetch. It's broken its dormancy stage. It's wanting to grow, but the soil temperatures are still too cool for infixation to occur. So we're improving the amount of root growth and root mass, improving sites for nodulation as soon as it warms up. And it's been about a 4-to-1 return. So that 20 pounds of nitrogen that we put down with clethodim yields us an additional 80 pounds of nitrogen on average.
Are you putting some molly with that?
We're doing 5 ounces of 16% molly, and we're doing a load of boron. For us, our most limiting nutrient in our corn crop has been boron early. And so that's been our number one way to get our boron levels up. We're using the cover crop itself to take up boron, something that's highly leachable, and slowly release it throughout the rest of the year.
Now, when you say you load it up, you're going out with what? Gallon, a half gallon?
We're going a half pound with that pass, and then another 1.25 pounds when we do our burn down application post planting.
Okay. And that's all broadcast, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
All right. That's interesting. Now, the key to nitrogen fixation with these legumes, the vetch and clovers, you obviously need some fairly decent growth. You I mean, it takes time. You obviously need it to fixate. I heard you say you were planting through it green, and you're getting rid of that that crown on the small grain. Do you have much tillering from that small grain that you still have to worry about? Obviously, you're going to kill it, but by the time it's joining, most of that tillering has already occurred, I'm assuming, and you've got quite a bit of that small grain out there that has really covered the ground. Planting performance cannot be, hindered to make this benefit. I mean, we can't undo that wrong in season. There's no way to make that simultaneous emergence, which is paramount, happen again. So my question would be, how big can the vetch be and the clover be to get enough nitrogen fixation that we covet, to get the full benefits of that? How big does it have to be to get that 200 pounds or 180 pounds that you reference? How big does it need to be? And some of that's going to depend on how early it's planted. I get it as to how big it gets, but you're planting through it green. How big is it on average to get the target in rate that you covet? And then where does it become problematic just planting through it?
Yeah, the big one has been removing the cereal from that mixture, or from the equation. So that clethodim helped big time. But this is probably on the cover crop side, the area that we focused on the most is how do we not sacrifice good planting performance. So on average, we're seeing about 7,000 pounds of dry matter in that vetch on a per acre basis in the clover. So it's a lot of material. It looks like a lot of material, but you're talking about something that compresses next to nothing. Because one of the things that we do is roll the vetch down before we plant. Some people use a cultipacker. You don't have to use a crimper roller. Crimper rollers are typically thought of in the cover crop mindset. I personally don't care for a crimper roller. It was designed for organic operations to terminate rye. I think for that system, it works well, but for what we're trying to do with our chemical control options, there's better devices. So we're using knife rollers to help segment up the vetch so that we're able to sweep it away from the row. Certain types of vertical till implements work really well for this as well. We're also looking at and trialing different methods of strip till or strip fresheners early. So about the time we're going in with that clethodim pass, we're also going in with a strip till to make a nice seed bed that we don't have to worry about, the vetches or the clovers interfering with our planting performance.
So, what strip till devices are you using? What have you experimented with?
So far, the Yetter strip freshener has been something that we've been looking at, working with a number of other growers, really last year and this year, to start scaling that one up. Mostly from some of these Total Acre guys, like they're so focused on planting performance and consistency of emergence. And so we're trying to figure out some ways that we can, again, get our cake and eat it too. So how can we warm that seed bed up a little bit earlier, maybe bias 3 or 4 more days, and more consistent emergence.
You talked about pounds of material. Just for the audience that's listening and not understanding what 7,000 or whatever that number was you used a moment ago, how big is that vetch? How big is that clover before you roll it?
About up to your waist. I mean, it is a pile of material. I mean, it looks like a lot, but it's actually really easy to plant to. When you plant through a green, if you try to go out and kill it a week in advance, like a normal burn down program that we see in this area, it is going to be an absolute train wreck. And it gets really ropey and it'll bind up on everything. But if it's green, it's really lush. It's easy to cut through.
Now, do you have to take and plant the same direction and use a roller that matches the width of your planter so that you're planting the similar direction that you laid it down, or does that matter?
It doesn't matter with vetch. It only matters with cereals that have a stem on them. But when it comes to these vetches and clovers, it doesn't matter the direction of travel compared to the rolling device. So most people are going to roll at a 5-degree angle to the angle that they're planting.
I got you.
All right. Now, the I was up with Total Acre guy Blaine. He does farmer to farmer. Great guy. And he planted into some live cover, and I was impressed with the stand that he had, Tim, because he wasn't even getting all his seed trench closed, and he had a little bit of grass out there, but he had a whole lot of legumes. Now, one of the things that you can help me understand, I get don't kill it because I know you mentioned Paul Davis and there are other growers when they learned that if they went and pre-killed their cover crop and then it turned off wet, that was a nightmare. So planting into it green helps out. What about when we get into wet conditions? That would be the first question I have, and then the other one is a lot of people across this country are dealing with slugs when they get into some no-till, reduced tillages. Are you running into any of those problems as well?
Yeah. So that was it the field with Blaine from last year that
This was
the group
this
looked at?
it was yeah a couple years ago. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we tracked that field, and he didn't kill out the oats, and it was about a 7% run count is what we were seeing. So like there's a there's a way to get that stand even better if we had just killed out that oat component. And some people are actually using spring oats to let you know to let Mother Nature take out the cereal component. Uh, but in terms of moisture, this was something I did a number of years ago with a soil moisture probe. I just tracked after a rainfall. I looked at a field that was planted in rye, a fallow field, and a field planted into vetch, and just tracked how the soil moisture trended. You'd imagine it's pretty simple. Rye, I mean, it soaked up the moisture quickly. So it was the first field to dry out, bone dry. The fallow field had a more gradual trend, but it dried to bone dry or to a wilting point fairly fast. The vetch was a little bit unique. It dried out really quickly to that ideal kind of window for planting. It kind of stayed there and then finally tapered off. So it was actually the slowest. It was the one of the quickest to get dried out enough fit for planting, but stayed in that range a lot longer, even compared to a fallow field that didn't have a plant transpiring water and pulling moisture. Um, so it told me, and I started doing some research on it, that the transpiration, the plant vetch shuts down its transpiration point a lot higher than something like a rye or other type of cereals. Um, so at a higher soil moisture, it's slowing down the amount of water that it's actually drawing from the soil. And that was something that I'd been told by a number of people for years, that there was something about the soil moisture underneath vetch, even when it was starting to get dry, that it was always a lot of moisture there. It didn't really it wasn't intuitive, but when we started doing those samples and measurements, it lined up to what they were saying.
Yeah.
To
Well,
answer the slugs, yep.
go ahead.
Yeah, the slugs thing has been really unique. Last year, 2024, we called it slug again. Everybody had slugs.
Yeah.
It was up and down the East Coast. It was horrific. It was really interesting when we got into vetch. We saw our slug pressure diminish. And one thing I've noticed about planting into vetch or any type of legume, so this could be winter peas as well, it harbors an astronomical amount of spiders, primarily wolf spiders. And that's the number one predator at that time of year on slugs. And so we've always noticed just reduced slug pressure. And it couldn't be more clear. Last year we had two fields right next door to each other. One field was rye that had been grazed off and then planted into corn, and the field next to it was vetch run under the same system. The rye field, we were counting 11, I think it was an average of 11 slugs per plant. We were about to lose that field. Over in the vetch, we had hardly any slugs. We had a hard time finding slugs. We had hardly any damage whatsoever. And it actually bled over into the rye field. So like the first 12 to 20 rows into that field that was in rye had very little slug damage. And so it was really it was a great opportunity to validate one of the things that we had anecdotally been seeing in vetch. It's like we're not seeing the slug pressures that we were seeing under, behind rye or wheat or what other type of cover crop.
Have you done this with beans as well, or has it mainly just been on corn acres?
I think that it's actually, I'm not at a point right now where I'm going to make broad recommendations, but our program that we're doing on corn we got one more year of trials. I think it's going to be what we do on soybeans as well. This mixture of a rye, vetch, winter peas, whatever it may be, take out the rye component, or oats with clethodim, and then plant into a high biomass of vetch or whatever it may be. We're seeing a lot of evidence come back with about a 10 to 20 bushel yield advantage. But Blaine was actually somebody that tried it out last year for us, and it was to the line about a 20 bushel yield bump. I think we're getting the early benefits.
David, don't you have problems with slugs, David?
Do I deal with slugs? Yeah.
Yes. And is it more on the bean or the corn side?
Well, I mean, we first had it on the cotton, and then it got into the corn and a little bit on beans, but you got to realize most of our beans are planted later. Over half of them are double crop, so slugs aren't going to be a big problem when it gets hot. But
would you say most of the Total Acre guys are complaining about more pressure on the beans than they do the corn, though?
Yeah, I would agree with you. Well, partially, a lot of guys are planting beans earlier now, so and then the beans are sitting there, so it gives it a little bit more pressure from a slug standpoint, and beans are growing slower there. Tim, you mentioned the wolf spiders. What about in the vetch? Because, also the ground beetles, they're big predators of slugs as well. So I didn't know if you saw an increase in those as well, because I know you're digging. You're not just looking above ground. So I was just curious if you saw more.
Yeah, I mean, there's more of everything. I mean, it is buggy as can be. So I think anything where we have a predator that's looking for food and staying in that system, it's given. I think what's going on, at least with the wolf spiders, is they have enough food from other sources to stick around long enough for that slug hatch, and then they're just feeding on the slugs at that point. And so we're probably seeing some of the same things with other predators there. I know. I think the second most effective slug predator is a assassin beetle, I believe it is. We don't really see them that much that time of year. They typically come in a little bit later, but I think the big one is wolf spiders, because if you don't like spiders, you won't like vetch. They're everywhere in it. It's wild.
Yeah, well, when it's kind of like Dowdy having a high fence deer farm. He's all about deer, and I'm in the seed production. So when I hear the word vetch, it's like, oh my goodness, because that's kind of hard to get out of wheat sometimes. So volunteer, but I mean, there are clearly some advantages to it, and the clovers. Now, the other thing, Dowdy asked about how tall the crop was getting. In reference to a traditional planting window, the growers planting where they have this cover crop a little bit later than normal than they would the guy that's either in a cereal cover crop or just no cover crop at all.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a slight delay because we're taking a little bit longer to warm up soil temperatures, and that for us is our trigger. So in these undulating hills of the Piedmont, we're looking for an average of 60 degrees soil temperature. So if we're a little bit flatter and we had more consistency across the field, maybe we'd back it up to 56 degrees. But to get that for us historically, it's been about April 24th to 25th. Some years it may be May 5th. Some years it may be a little bit sooner. But I would say there's probably a 3 to 4 day delay compared to early terminated cover crop or fallow type system. That's where I think the strip till side, opening up a little bit of that ground to be able to warm up the soil a little bit quicker, may be a good balance between both worlds.
Well, I also know that you're not only looking at trying to help guys save a few dollars on fertility, but you're looking at a system that's going to make a farmer more money. And even planting a little bit later, we never know in Eastern Virginia on some of our sandier soils, we don't know if we're going to get rain or not and when it's going to happen. Anytime you can conserve moisture. But for a guy that's saving on some fertilizer, reinvesting in some cover crop. Let's take any government subsidy program out, because not all the viewers here have a chance to get any government money. What kind of return are the growers seeing? I mean, clearly they're more profitable that way. So, do you have any idea? Well, I know you.
In 2024 was a widespread drought, right? It was rough. Worked with a guy really closely. He's actually on our team now. The only corn crop that he was able to harvest was where he had it behind this system. Everywhere else, he had to bush hog down. He didn't have a crop. Like that. That's about as maximum of a return as you can get. So it excels in dry conditions, but what's been really fascinating, we're in a really good year, like you said at the beginning, where we have a above average year. This may be one of the best average corn crops yield in the state of Virginia. We're seeing a lot of 15 to 20% above the average of the farm. It excels in that situation too, because we're only crediting a portion amount of that total nitrogen. So we're getting about 230 pounds of nitrogen from it. We're only crediting about 115 pounds of that. But if we have the conditions that promote good yield, moisture, and temperatures, we're releasing a lot more of that nitrogen. So we have this source and form of nitrogen that's flexing to our season. If it turns off dry, we're keeping nitrogen in the system. If we have good moisture, yield potential goes up, nitrogen demand goes up. We have nitrogen release coming from the vetch and the clovers as well. That's helping to match. So it's a pretty interesting. It's a very interesting system in terms of the payback. Highly variable, but it's always been profitable for us. I'd say looking at tens of thousands of acres of yield data on this, we're at about a 19 bushel yield advantage compared to without, even taking into account that 4 or 5 day delay in planting. But the big one has been our reduction in NPK spends. We don't put phosphate down anymore. We verified we have phosphate in our soils, but we are accessing it now because of the microbial activity that we have. And we're validating with tissue test. Our V3 tissue tests range anywhere from 0.65 to 0.9%, and we stay super high throughout the rest of the season. Reduced our nitrogen budget bill by about 50 to 75%, depending on the field and the biomass we have. And potash has been a big one as well. We're getting better cycling and better efficiency with our potash as well.
And now, timing to get this crop planted. We mentioned that the country's been warmer than normal. I mean, we had we were cooler than normal, but we're still carrying on a warming trend right now. And people have been dry, but some getting a little bit of rain. You got just enough this morning, last night to make you mad. But moisture wise, for group that are getting crops off now, clearly you would say let's get some stuff planted as soon as possible.
Yeah, we want to, with something like vetch, it's got a minimum germination point of 40 degrees. The problem with it, it's got a really long germination period. It can go upwards of 20 days to germinate. So the closer we get to November around here, it tends to be more of a no man's land. We may have the soil temperatures for a while to start the germination process, but then it may drop out, and that's where we tend to lose tails. So we like to get it seeded, preferably in September. A lot of fields we have to fly on. As we get later into October, we start getting more and more nervous. The probability of not getting a nice even stand increases.
Now, do you fly this on or broadcast it, or you plant it with a grain drill with a small seed attachment? Obviously, with oats, you'd have a large seed attachment of some sort. What is the best method to get a stand, and what are most people using to get that planting?
I mean, the most consistent method is going to be with a seeder or drill. Seed to soil contact, getting it down to a nice consistent soil temperature and moisture. That's going to be our most consistent stand. The problem is at scale, it's nearly impossible to get every acre drilled. So like the sister operation to the seed company is about 6,000 acres of seed and crop production. And so in order to get all that covered, we're using a variety of tools. We will spread some with a spreader and run the knife rollers to incorporate. We'll fly some on. We just flew about 2,000 acres on Sunday. We will drill some in. Like, it takes a variety of ways to get it all done when we're dealing with several thousand acres of operation.
Is there a risk of these small seeds? If you just say a guy did some field work, especially behind corn, David, we have so many people having problems with slugs, especially in beans. I could see this working both ways. The nitrogen, beans just sit there in the Midwest. They don't like to grow. And I always tell people to put out some nitrogen up front to help get them start growing. If we could check this box with a cover crop, and getting some early nitrogen, as long as it doesn't inhibit obvious, nitrogen fixation, I could see this checking the box on holding the world together, helping with stewardship, getting biological activities ramped up, and providing some nitrogen there. I see it as a win-win-win. And if that happens, that's a no-brainer. But I just don't know if it's going to slow down nitrogen fixation in the beans or not. So I'd be interested in that and what your data would show. But I guess the things that get me started thinking is, if you're going to broadcast it first, let's talk about planting. If you're going to run some kind of vertical tillage across it or something out there to do some land prep and cover it up, is it depth sensitive? Obviously, for it emerging, obviously it is for emergence to happen simultaneous and getting uniform emergence, not having them at different depths. But can you bury it too deep? I mean, obviously, you going out with vertical tillage, you may or may not be going deep depending on the tool. What is your parameters on that with vetch and clover?
Yeah, so when it comes to vetch, I mean, they can go down to 2 inches and be just fine. Alonzo clover, more than a 1/4 inch, it's a very, very, very fine, small seed. It doesn't have the energy to get out the ground, so more than a 1/4 inch, and it's going to struggle. Really, ideally, it's 1/8 of an inch. We'd like to see a lot of it on the surface. But we also see, like, we are only putting that in our mixtures where we have wet areas in fields that we want nice, consistent stand. So if we have a well-drained field across the entire field, we're not going to use that type of clover. And then talking about your nitrogen side, we have not seen where it's inhibiting nitrogen fixation on the soybeans. I think that's a discussion that's not had enough is the form of nitrogen. A lot of people are only talking about nitrate and ammonium as the 2 forms of nitrogen the plant can take up. But the plant can also take up amino acids and simple proteins. And that's kind of the form that we're getting out of the vetch. The vetch, as it's breaking down, or winter peas or whatever it may be, it's breaking down from more complex protein structures into simple proteins, then to amino acids, and then finally into ammonium and nitrate. But we're giving that, whether it be a corn plant or a soybean plant, the opportunity to take up amino acid form nitrogen, simple protein form of nitrogen. And when it does that, it's known as a metabolic shortcut. So you mentioned the application of Molly with that clethodim application. We're doing that for nitrogen fixation in the nitrate reductase pathway. That's over 20% of the photosynthetic budget is just going towards the conversion of nitrate and ammonium into amino acids. So if we're able to shortcut that pathway, we're saving that plant a boatload of energy that it can put towards other processes, maybe other nutrient uptake, its own natural defense systems. So that's been, there's always been something to the plant health with corn or soybeans behind this vetch that it's been hard to put our finger on. But there's so many different things that we're identifying as benefits that are probably, and all of them together is what's showing that we have this benefit. I mean, there's a potent biostimulant plant growth promoter called triacontanol that's in vetch. We're getting mountains of it. You can literally, it's sold as a plant growth regulator. You can buy it in a bag. We're just getting mountains of it from the vetch crop itself. So there's all these little value propositions that we're seeing from this cover crop system.
I'm gonna ask the $1 million questions next. When do you spray the herbicide? Are you spraying it immediately after planting so that you don't have any, emergence competition? The second piece of it is people are like, well, this just seems like a no-brainer. We're getting biological, we're getting free nitrogen, we're getting moisture, reductions. Yes, we got to incorporate a roller of some sort. What does it cost in the seed? If you go at a seeding rate and guys can get it planted in the Midwest and they get a stand, obviously the Midwest might get a touch colder than Virginia, but if guys were going to consider this, when would they need to spray a herbicide? What does the typical herbicide program look like to get rid of this so that we don't have in-season competition? And then timing of that herbicide, and then what does it cost per acre to grow?
All right, so we'll start with the seed mixture itself. It's probably going to run you $50 an acre. It's about the average. We can make it a little bit cheaper. It can be a little bit more expensive, but around $50 an acre. When we're terminating the vetch itself, you're exactly right. Right after we plant, so that's something we're having to pay attention to, is making sure that we have the sprayer there to spray within 24 to 48 hours after planting. Worst scenario possible would be to plant and then get rained out for a week. That has happened to us, and there is a yield drag because of that. In terms of what we're running in that tank mix to kill the vetch, a lot of things work. That bit of mechanical damage from rolling the vetch will kill about 80 to 90% of it. We're got some guys running Remoxone only programs. Some people are using more systemic based programs with certain levels of residuals. Some people are taking all the residuals out. Dicamba tends to be our go-to for 100% kill, but it's a fairly easy crop to kill. The limitation to adoption, it has become a bit of a no-brainer. The hesitancy is, like David was saying, vetch is a bit of a four-letter word where you grow wheat. So nobody wants to grow vetch. Vetch is typically looked at as a weed. But we don't have to use vetch. We can use winter peas. We can use different types of clovers. The system works regardless of the species. We personally like vetch. We get the most bang for our buck out of vetch. But there's other ways to customize the mixture and the program.
I noticed when you talked about, and I don't know if you knew this, Tim, but we grew some Austrian winter peas here. And, a lot of people said, you're going to put any cereals with it. And I'm like, nah, because I was thinking we might harvest them, give it a try, because I saw the seed cost for it. And they got about 7 foot tall. I couldn't believe how tall they got when you stood it up. But they were only about 6 inches above elevation of ground, because they just lodged right down. So I get where you're how the stuff can just lay down, and it makes it easier to plant into. We should have planted corn behind it, would have been the ideal, but we planted soybeans because it fit in that tract of ground. Dowdy, I was impressed just with a no-till coulter, double disc opener, no trash sweep. Did a tremendous job there, Tim. That was amazing. And we sprayed it after we planted because I was concerned. Wasn't hard to kill at all. So the fact to me was how easy it was planting. I mean, I think about, you talk 7 tons of residue. That just gives me a heartburn. It's not. It was worth. It's worth trying again, and that's what we're planning to do.
Yeah.
David, did the beans just sit there? They seem to respond to that nitrogen residual that was there. And did you have any slugs?
No. The answer to slugs, no. We did not have any slug problems there. They were planted the same time in which we planted our double crop beans. We took the weed off there. So those beans, I'm not going to say tissue levels, they were better from a standpoint of nitrogen. I don't know that I saw the phosphorus that you're talking about, Tim, but I'm looking at soybean corn plant. Um, and then other nutrients we didn't catch anything. So there is something to that nitrogen portion you're referring to. And Dowdy, no, I'm not going to say. I mean, they all grew because it was warm. I mean, their beans weren't sitting there, so
Yeah.
they.
I was thinking maybe they were on the early season side. And my next question was going to be, did you plant with a strip till through there, or did you run a strip tiller ahead of it?
Regular was a 1795 planter. Yeah.
Well, y'all got the brain turning, because the growers are always asking us about, ways to do something different, but also the ways to be more sustainable, and just sustainable, not from the environment, just how can they make ROI and that kind of sustainability, which really all that matters. This just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, I've always talked about the power and the benefit of cover crops. Well, I mean, we got something growing in the South 300 days a year. The only reason something's not growing the other 65 is simply because we're probably planting or harvesting. But we have a lot of heat in the South. But the brain's turning on the, I played with AU early cover vetch. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Tim. Dr. Lee did a bunch of work with that years ago. Obviously, we'll stay warmer longer than most people into the season, and then the rolling piece of it is the piece that I wonder, is it paramount? I mean, if I were planning to run a strip tiller, would that accomplish what I want to accomplish and leave just the middles in between the rows standing and upright if they don't fall naturally? Would that suffice enough, and then me burn it all down after the planter pass went through and after the strip till went through? Would that work, or do I need to consider something different? Do you have to roll it down to get the full benefit?
I think in general, you would be fine there because we're primarily rolling it down for consistency of planter performance. So you're achieving that in that type of system in a strip till. The other thing to consider is going to be, we want to make sure there's not as much shade on that plant. So if that vetch does happen to be tall, say the cereal component didn't get 100% killed out, and our cover is a foot and a half tall, and it's not melting down as rapidly as we want it, then we start to have to worry about shade on that early corn crop. In any type of shade, it's going to prioritize vegetative growth over reproductive development. We have reproductive development occurring at V2. So
sure. What do you think the nitrogen availability will be as uniform with some that's left standing versus that's laying flat?
Yeah, I mean, we're taking into, these numbers are the above ground portion of the biomass. I'm not able to dig up all the roots and measure all the nitrogen in the roots. There's a lot of nitrogen in the roots as well. So we're underestimating the nitrogen supply, but I'd rather be conservative on nitrogen than too aggressive and short the crop potentially in certain situations.
Well, the best piece of information I've heard you say today was you said that you were pulling tissue samples to quantify values, and the thing that struck me the most of the numbers that you spit out was that you were seeing p values in corn crops from 0.6, 0.65 to 0.9. I think, if I heard you correctly, David, that's strong as well water. And most guys, they always say I struggle with p values, and I always tell them different things to use, but I always encourage them to try cover crops first. And David, we'll see 2 to 3 tenths of a point higher every time we plant a cover crop versus a non-cover crop 4 or 5 rows over where there's no cover crop there. And there's nothing different other than having a cover crop there. And at that point, I think it's biological activity around a living root mass where you're planting seed. And our soils are warm already, so I don't think there's enough difference there to matter. I think it's just the biological activity around the living root mass. So what numbers intrigued you the most, David? Because I mean, that's the number. That's the number we think all the time of trying to increase, especially in corn early to set as many rows around. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's funny that you picked up on that because I was hoping you were like got knocked off the podcast or something and you didn't catch that. But when Tim was talking about it, we see the same thing. And then, Dowdy, you've been in Iowa at Mike Jenks, and he does a tremendous amount of trials where he's trying all kinds of different products in furrow, even with phosphorus in furrow, no phosphorus, biological products. And year in and year out, the ones that give him the highest phosphorus levels on that V3 tissue sample that Tim was talking about is those that have the cover crops involved. So we all see that. Now, for the growers that are not in the cover crop arena and they're trying to identify how can they improve their phosphorus level, is I would challenge them to try some cover crops. And you don't have to try a whole lot of acres, just experiment. Go out there with a few acres and just see enough to where it's worth your time to actually plant it, drill it, get it in early enough, and then do some tissue sampling. So, but yeah, that phosphorus, when most people, Dowdy, just to give people audience a reference point, are usually in that 0.2 to 0.35. And here, Tim's double and triple in that. So that is stout. And, for $50 an acre, growers spend a lot more than that for in furrow, Tim, than $50 an acre for cover.
Well, not only that, David Frick, we had a year this year where MAP and DAP is going to cost people $800 to $1,000 a ton. Yeah. And 1034 and 1137 prices probably haven't been set yet, but filth, they're going to be high too. And if you can do this and get the nitrogen, phosphorus, I mean, let's face it, he said his K levels were higher too. It's a no-brainer. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world if you can manage, obviously, getting the process planted. You got to count those costs, and you got to count the $50 an acre. But when you start looking at the other benefits, it just seems like a no-brainer. How much growth must you have, Tim, before winter? And when I say before winter, for these guys to try this in the Midwest, that's thinking about something to do different on a small scale or large, ideally going behind beans if they're harvested first would be the most logical place to put them, especially because they got time on their hands. The calendar's a friend. But how much above ground growth for that vetch or cover or clover or whatever, how big does it need to get for them to feel like they got a good enough stand to not have to replant, or that they're going to get benefit from
it? And the question is into the fall. So how big does the vetch need to be going into the wintertime? Spring.
Correct.
Spring. Some of the best vetch stands, you can't tell they're there from the road. I've actually had a situation where NRCS disqualified every single farm for a grower, and it was one of the best vetch stands I've ever seen in the fall. And it's because they didn't really know what they were looking for. Vetch is just a sprig. It's tiny. We want it small, especially where the winter is more harsh. The smaller, closer to the ground it is, the more likely it's going to survive that winter. So I'd say for the Midwest, the upper parts of the Midwest, we're going to want to see vetch no more than 2 or 3 inches tall going in the wintertime. But the growth habit in the spring, I mean, it just blows up. It takes over out of nowhere. So fall, the legumes, we want relatively small. And then we wait mid-April, they start blowing up. In your area, it'd probably be mid-March, beginning of March, they'll start blowing up.
I think we got enough growers that listen to us. Somebody's probably going to try this. When you start talking about supply and stuff blowing up, what kind of supply of seed is out there for people if they wanted to try something like this?
Here's the tricky part. This is where we kind of started as a company. We realized that there was nobody doing the work on variety selection at our kind of level of distribution. So we started looking at what variety works well in the Mid-Atlantic, what variety is going to work well in the Southeast, what variety is going to work in the Midwest. And so there's supply out there, and they just, there's not many people doing what we do, but they're out there. Like green cover seed is another option for folks that are going to have enough expertise on the varieties that they're selling to properly place with the grower. So we don't want to take a woolly pod that we would recommend down in Georgia and place it in Minnesota. It's going to die out immediately. So variety selection is going to be really, really critical.
Tim, if people want to get in touch with you, man, how can they do that? And what can they do to pick your brain or to find somebody near them to try to look at this?
Yeah. Website has all our contact information. So vaseedco.com. So vaseedco.com. Look us up on there, and then we have a number of sales reps and myself. We're happy to talk shop and go through the details of cover crops.
Well, Tim, don't sell everything in the Southeast yet. I'm going to get with you. We need to talk because the brain's turning, and I got to figure out some way to try to make some money, not just try to make yield, but try to make some money. And this would be a way I could see, I don't know that I'd take and depend on everything just coming off my total budget, but I could see this for luxury feeding, David. Checking some boxes, especially if you were going to play in some high yielding plots. I could see this as being somewhere to play and see if you couldn't, get some wins from it.
Yeah, I saw Dowdy. I saw you scratching your head, so I know is turning in there. Tim, man, we really appreciate first and foremost you being part of Total Acre because you bring a lot to the group. Not only the Virginia Seed Company, just your knowledge and your willingness to share with the growers. And I know a lot of the members or several of the members are there because they're part of your group. So thank you for that. And today coming and talking about cover crops because for me, when I start thinking about vetch, like I said, and Austrian winter peas and stuff, some of those give me a little heartburn. But when you see the advantages to them, so even myself, we're going to try some in front of some corn this coming year. So I got to be experimenting like Dowdy is as well. So thanks for
one more question, David, that's got my brain turning, and I got to ask, and it'll be a short one. You talk about all these bugs. You talk about all these pests, beneficials above ground and below ground. At planting, do you still recommend an insecticide in the furrow? What's your thoughts on that? Or do you hurt yourself from having a beneficial there to help take care of the slugs?
I think where I've always been, broad acre recommendation of insecticide, I don't do. So if we have a known issue and it's a severe issue when we've reached the economic thresholds, we'll recommend it insecticide for sure. But with that being said, like on this operation, number of operations I've worked with for a number of years, we don't use insecticides. We've just not needed it. I think the beneficials are there and the plant health is there, that we're just not needing as much insecticides for it.
Well, if the slugs are there and the beneficials are killing them, the slugs obviously raise havoc later, right?
Yep.
So having the beneficials there, I could see it. Okay. Well, as David mentioned, Tim, it's always good to have iron sharpening iron. As the audience can tell, you're no dummy and you do your homework and, your wealth of knowledge in a lot of different areas. And we do appreciate you being a part of Total Acre and having been a part of Total Acre for quite some time now. And thank you for joining us today. When David said, let's talk about cover crops, I said, man, find Tim. I couldn't remember your name. I remembered the face. I described him to you. I said, I'm drawing a blank on his name, David. I said, but you know who I'm talking about. He said, oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. So it didn't take but a minute. I said, that's the guy we need to get on here today to have some conversation. So, Tim, thank you so much for being a part of the group and providing knowledge for everybody.
Yes, sir. Thank you as well. And thank you for your time today. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, as always, we appreciate any guests that we have on. And Dowdy, it's always fun to be on the phone or podcast with you. I hate that I kept cutting out. I got to figure out how to not do this on the phone. Every time it rings, somebody calls me, I get kicked off. But I look forward to the next time we get together, Dowdy. And as always, may God bless all the seeds that we sow. So thank y'all.
Yes, sir. Well, be safe and make sure you get some good data, because I want to know what hybrids is ringing the bell so I can have a chance to pick the right one for Georgia maybe next year.
All right, we'll do that. All right.
Take care. Take care, guys. See you.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another new episode of Breaking Barriers with R&D. Be sure to like and subscribe. And remember, all episodes are available on Farm Journal TV and anywhere podcasts are found.